and gentlemen. I'll let Yves rest a bit after the keynote. So Ben, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure.
You've been a vocal critic of cryptocurrencies. What cryptocurrencies are for you, and why you've been so negative about the whole phenomena?
Sure. Well, I like to joke that the book that I've read and that's coming out next month, Easy Money, is about money and lying. I know a little bit about money. I have an undergraduate degree in economics, so not quite as qualified as some of you, but and admittedly 20 years old. So I know a little bit about money from my econ degree. I know a bit of it from making a bit of it in showbiz over 2 decades. But I know about lying because I'm an actor and I do it for a living. And folks were lying. They were presenting these things as currencies even though they didn't serve the 3 functions of money. They weren't an effective medium of exchange, unit of account, or store of value. So what were they? Well, how did they work? You put real money into them. You expected to make money off of that investment through no work of your own. That sounded like an investment contract to me. You know, 19,999 of the 20,000 cryptocurrencies that had not been classified as commodities, like Bitcoin
Only
has,
so little?
Yeah, were securities. They just hadn't been properly enforced. And so I was worried that a lot of people were going to lose a lot of money. And unfortunately, that happened. So yeah, I think they're by and large, I think they're securities.
Okay. Yves, you've served as a member of the board of European Central Bank from 2012 until 2020. So during your tenure, cryptocurrencies really emerged as an asset. What are your experiences? Like, what were your observations when you first witnessed that there is a new class as cryptocurrencies? Do you share any of what Ben said?
Well, obviously, innovation has to be viewed positively. That is the first start. Second, we are in a functioning market economy where you should support innovation because basically it brings also welfare and productivity increases to our societies. And disruptive change is one of the elements which make that the market economy superior to a centralized planned economy. So basically, you have to be positive vis-à-vis any change. But second, change also offers opportunity to circumvent rules, to have illicit activities, to have opaque activities. And that is where the less positive effect of innovation has to be circumscribed. And that's why you have regulation. But again, regulation, if it comes in too early, if it is too intrusive at the beginning, it could stifle innovation. So you have to have a proportionate approach, and proportionality is nice in words, it's more difficult in practice. And that's why we have these panels to discuss what is the right amount and where do we sit.
But as a central banker back then and now retired, did you think of cryptocurrencies as a competition to national currencies, a competition to a project like Euro, like one currency for member states in the EU?
We saw at the beginning that very often the corner from where there were attempts to support cryptocurrencies or other currencies was the same corner from which we had high doubts whether the euro would be a viable project. So that was why we also insisted that there is a monetary sovereignty attempt to it, and that we have a mandate to defend this monetary sovereignty in our region. And that is the reason why we said, okay, we need a certain amount of regulation to have this innovation be in organized patterns, but we also will always maintain the public money as the anchor of the public system, especially in a European area where the economy is financed to 70% by the banking system, as opposed to other jurisdictions where this is only half so. We have not managed to have a lot of alternative funding for our economies. Venture capital is less developed in Europe. Capital market union has still to make a lot of progress. And that is why we at the same time started thinking about issuing our own central bank digital currency. We initiated discussions with central banks around the world. Some were more enthusiastic, some less so, but this cooperation among central banks has created great results, both on the regulatory side, but also on the preparatory side for central bank digital currency. A last word, preparation for digital currency does not mean implementation of a digital currency. Central banks need to be prepared. When the public is asking for it, they should have the options without waiting another 7 or 8 years for implementation.
I would love to come back to Digital Euro project later, but Bryan, you've been talking to many US policymakers at either at the federal but also state level. What are their primary concerns regarding cryptocurrency and digital assets?
Yeah, I think their primary concern has been the predatory inclusion on those most susceptible, right? It's difficult for you to rub two nickels in together in your pocket, but you're being frauded to think that you're going to turn those nickels into thousands and thousands of nickels or dollars or tokens. They're preying on those that are less fortunate here. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns. And then, I've started to notice they're understanding the conflict of interest that occurs. You take FTX, where, you're not only you creating a token, you're issuing it, you're, putting the value on it and exchanging it. There's serious conflict of interest there. And, we see what happened. We've seen since FTX, the fallout there, what has happened. I also see on the state level a lot more activity and a lot more real genuine interest in understanding the technologies and really kind of developing some type of framework that can protect those constituents in their states. So in New York State particularly, you have the BIT license, which has been really the gold standard. And I think it speaks highly of New York State, the Department of Financial Services, in the sense of FTX never qualified for that, right? So I think it speaks volumes that this type of regulatory oversight really makes an impact. And now I also would say that the BIT license can be much more powerful. And, I've recently done some work with the New York State Attorney General's office on the crypto bill, where I feel that actually empowers even more, fines and regulatory oversight that's required. So I think on both the federal and the state side, where there's a huge misunderstanding of these technologies and the purpose of these technologies, there's still a great deal of education that has to occur. And it starts with the definitions of these terms. It starts with, the actual implications of what this technology can do.
Bryan mentioned FTX, and I know, Ben, that you testified before at the hearing of the US Senate Banking Committee. It was associated with the collapse of the FTX.
Yes.
So
he was arrested the day before, I think.
Can you share a little bit of your experience of testifying there? Like, how did you feel? And then, what type of regulatory developments would you see that could prevent the cases of FTX and others in the future?
Right. Well, the United States is the only country in the world that I'm aware of that separates its securities regulation from its commodities regulation in the manner in which we do, which is, we have a CFTC and we have an SEC. They are overseen by different committees in the House and in the Senate. As a armchair economist, this creates perverse incentives, in my opinion. First of all, there's a gray area, what's going to be classified as a commodity or as a security. And so Bitcoin's classification as a commodity, which is something I explore in the book, but is was somewhat random to a certain degree, right? There was a futures contract, therefore it could be classified as a commodity. Created enough gray area to where a lot of crypto companies could come in, issue their own coins, and quite frankly, commit fraud, or what certainly looks like fraud. And so I think, you know, that is a massive issue that has to be addressed in some manner, I believe, or there's always the potential for this sort of thing to happen again. I don't know what the solution is to that, because there are a lot of ingrained political interests there. So do you create some body within the United States that's going to oversee both of them? Do you try to merge them? These are difficult questions to answer. As for testifying, I think the thing that scared me the most was that over the summer of last year, as I went down to DC to have meetings to discuss what I had found in my year and a half researching cryptocurrency and speaking to people like Sam Bankman-Fried, who I interviewed in July of last year, speaking to Alex Mashensky of Celsius, the now bankrupt company, being sued for fraud by the New York Attorney General, speaking to other colorful figures in crypto. Sam had given so much money to both parties, $40 million to the Democrats. One of his colleagues gave $23 million to the Republicans. Now it's still alleged that there was a $93 million straw donor scheme that he was the head of. They had at least at a minimum kept legislators from really doing anything about the issue. And worse than that, there was a bill that still exists actually in the Ag Committee that they call Sam's bill. And it's a bill that the industry, you know, helped sort of put together. That's terrifying, because it feels as though the moneyed interests are, you know, potentially corrupting the system to the detriment of the average retail customer who really is not sophisticated enough. I mean this with no condescension, but they're not sophisticated enough to understand what's really happening. They're being sold, to Brian's point, a get-rich-quick scheme. And the get-rich-quick scheme is the oldest con in the book. They've been having get-rich-quick schemes since there has been money to get rich quickly with. So this was just the newest iteration. So I think the issues are you know, they're pretty complicated in the United States, pretty thorny. And my experience was legislators and regulators were playing catch-up.
Do you at least see an intention, irrespective of the side of the aisle in the Congress, to solve those issues?
Somewhat. You know, I believe that if you enforce securities laws that are on the books, that have been on the books for 90 years, we were talking about this just backstage, I think 99% of this stuff would go away. Because if they're securities, what's the product? What's the good? What's the service? You know, securities laws are primarily predicated on disclosure. You need disclosure. You need to understand when you're investing your money, who you're giving that money to, and what the hell they're doing with that money. We don't have that in crypto right now. I mean, we really don't have transparency. We really don't know who's controlling the supply of the coins, what they're doing with them. And as soon as you clarify that, I think, you know, a lot of this stuff will go away.
In the EU, we definitely have more clarity. You've mentioned the recently enacted regulation, market in crypto assets, that distinguishes among different types of assets. It also says that if a crypto asset fits into the definition of a security, it is a security. Do you think this regulatory framework that EU adopted is comprehensive enough? It's sufficient? Do you think maybe there is still something missing?
There is certainly always something missing. It's not comprehensive, and it is acknowledging that there are gaps to be filled. As I mentioned myself, some future legislation on DLT will be coming in, and I think even in the different opinions of different agencies, it was mentioned there are still gaps. I mentioned the ECB opinion. I remember They said that the concentration risk inside groups or related group entities are not yet clearly enough identified. NFTs, for example, are not covered by this legislation. There are daily new innovations and new instruments coming up. So it's not meant to be comprehensive. But let me say just a word. We have our own problems in Europe, which are different from the problems that you have in the US, which I understand quite well. We have our own complexity in the institutional arrangements and the setups among agencies between the national level, European level. Basically, the legislation went through very quickly in Parliament because it left a lot of assessment at the national competent authorities level. But I would have some concerns if the national competent authority would have to make an assessment on the financial stability assessment of the whole euro area. If they would have to make an assessment about the disturbance of monetary policy. A national competent authority does not have that remit and does not have that competence. So we have to see whether this regulation is properly working. But on the other hand, what is different structurally in Europe from the US is that our citizens, to some extent, are more risk averse. For a simple reason, because we have social safety nets, which are more widespread. So we have also the problem, the counterpart, that we do not take risks. We don't have money for as much money as the US for venture capital, for other innovations. Money tends to be more sticky in bank accounts. Whether that will remain so in the future, that's another question I'm ready to discuss. But on the other hand, I understand that at least the question that the US authorities might have asked themselves was that if this innovation takes place outside the boundaries of the US, is it not even creating more difficulty by offering services cross-border? Is it not better to let them develop within our boundaries and then try to zero in on them and to try to circumscribe a framework? I don't know whether this was the question that they asked themselves, but I could very well have imagined. Our attitude in Europe was, for the moment when this emerged, I said, we don't want to have people handling citizens' money if they are not subject to the same rules as they are being organized in other supervised and regulated financial areas. Same risk, same regulation again. That was our basic approach. And we said we would not allow anyone to come in and offer services in Europe if he would not be under the surveillance of an organized public agencies in another area of the world that is ready to exchange information with us. That was our basic approach.
Bryan, you had a couple of meetings with the EU officials earlier this year. You observe the developments at the EU front. There is this perception, at least in my opinion, that US is lagging behind in terms of how to address all those regulatory concerns of crypto. How do you comment that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I see it two different ways. I think that there's benefits on both sides of the pond, right? In the EU, I see where they're very open to have these conversations and really kind of kick the tires of these technologies and understand them. It's very a pragmatic approach where they're very heavily involved. I love the idea of the EU sandbox and creating standards and frameworks. You know, ultimately to really bring this technology to the forefront, we need compliances. So SOC 2, ISO type of compliances, so that way businesses and governments feel safe to bring these technologies in and utilize them. What I think is different in the United States, and you know, maybe it's just me hailing from New Hampshire, is that the US has always kind of led in these type of issues. And I think we are in a unique position where, as Ben mentioned, you know, the 1933 Securities Act really gives us, you know, a tool automatically that we can apply to these, cryptocurrencies and clean up a lot of the froth and, really just clean up the crypto casino. And I'll call it a casino in the sense, that, you're betting.
Casino.
It's a casino, but it's worse than a casino, right? A casino has regulation.
Casino.
Exactly.
It's an offshore casino.
Exactly. And there's some oversight and there's some regulation there. And, on the U.S. side too, I also see where, the lack of federal direction and, leadership, right, has led to all these states now, whether it's Wyoming or New York State, really, having these sandboxes there. And so on both, I think that there's positive and negatives on the way that they're approaching this. I would love to see a more holistic view of, more global conversations about this, but I think that will take quite some time. And I still feel that we're years before the majority of these policymakers all over the world are really understanding the value proposition that this technology offers. Right now we're looking at it as a financial instrument. When I came into this space, more so in 2016, it was really off of, spending 20 years, consulting about technology that can, either make things cheaper, faster, or better, right? And when I discovered blockchain, BSV in particular, it really resonated in the sense of how it improves, just the real innovation that is there for those three things, right? It's going to make you stronger, it's going to make you a better company, it's going to lower your costs, and it's going to make more of an impact on those customers or constituents. And I think that that's vital, right? We're at a time now where, the internet is broken. I'll be doing a presentation later on one of our products, CertaHash, that kind of helps with identifying data breaches. And it's interesting when I have these conversations with policymakers where they're so far looking at this just primarily as a financial instrument, whereas it really can embolden and empower these type of networks and these type of digital infrastructures to a degree that we're not able to replicate in legacy technology. So I think that there's a great deal of education still to go on. I know that there's a lot of rabble-rousing, right, as far as various bills that people are pushing out. But I think those that are really leading are on these state levels, like New York State.
I mean, Yves mentioned that people in Europe are more risk-averse, at least at the continent. But on the other hand, EU has really developed consumer protection laws.
Right.
In the US, we witnessed that there were many celebrities openly promoting cryptocurrencies, NFT, speculative products, and crypto exchanges.
Right.
What's your opinion about that?
It was terrible, to be honest with you. But that's not the root problem, of course. Celebrities have always hawked products. Ever since there have been celebrities, they have used their voices in order to, advocate for various companies that would pay them a fee to do so. The difference is the nature of the products. In this case, these are financial products, and they are not licensed financial.
I mean, we don't see celebrities promoting financial instruments, right?
Right, and for good reason. I think that to my mind, the celebrities were just sort of indicative of where we were in the life cycle of the con, to be honest with you. When it gets as big as possible, you need the biggest megaphone possible, and that is the most famous people in the world, whether they are actors or athletes or musicians or whatever. And so you saw all of these celebrities out there hawking for, well, in some cases, they were actually hawking for specific cryptocurrencies, which is why you saw Kim Kardashian get fined by the SEC. That is actually illegal if you are, selling an unregistered unlicensed security, and for good reason. The first article that Jacob Silverman, who's written the book with me, the first article that we wrote was about celebrities shilling crypto. Celebrity crypto shilling is a moral disaster, I think was the title that they gave the article. That was October of 2021, 1 month before the market peaked. So you can see as she was finally, I think, settled with the SEC in the fall of last year, the time lag here creates a window of opportunity for people to exploit it. And so I think celebrities I mean, honestly, I think it gets more complicated when they're shilling for an exchange, because I don't know if, it'll be interesting. Now there are civil lawsuits filed against a number of celebrities who shilled for FTX, for example. I have no idea as to how successful those will be, but my takeaway is that it never should have gotten that big to begin with, and the celebrities are not the root problem, of course. They're just the sort of the symptom of a bigger problem.
I mean, cryptocurrencies and speculation is a very narrow use case of blockchain technology. So here at this conference, we focus on everything else, of all the utility that this technology can bring. Bryan, apart from your role within BSV Association, you're also an entrepreneur. How do you see this technology, how it can bring the innovation, utility, efficiencies, at the same time, but this will be my question later, maybe to the others, how regulation should find the balance with addressing cryptocurrencies risks, and at the same time don't stifle the innovation, something that Yves mentioned.
Yeah, consumer protection should be first and foremost right now. Again, I'm more of a pragmatic approach towards these regulation of these technologies, whereas we already have laws that are very well established that will help clean up a lot of the, the cons, right? The fraud that's occurring. As far as the balance to strike between, again, it's going to take time where, technology requires, these type of compliances like the SOC 2 and the ISO to improve, the overall, application into an infrastructure that is existing today and some data network. And, for us to come into this space and really provide this type of utility, you can see where it makes a difference, right? Something, that mitigates the detection time of a data breach, which is averaging 221 days to near instant, is a night and day difference when you have a plethora of data breaches that occur every day, specifically in the US, where you had SolarWinds that infected 18,000 direct customers, 30,000 indirect customers, 10 different departments of the US government, including 4 branches of our military, right? So, I think while we are in desperate need of this utility today, I don't feel as if the education and understanding of what the value proposition that was brought forth by Satoshi, right, as far as this fusion of data and finance and what that applies to, and removing this heavy reliance on trusted third parties and providing a way to monetize something on the internet today without that reliance on them. So, as far as the, balance between the two, we need more sandboxes. We need more, incubators in the sense of, New York City testing and touching and feeling and understanding these technologies way more intimately than they are. While, Senator Warren pushes, her anti-digital money asset bill, which is great because, certainly Binance has, the exchange has processed over 8 billion in transactions coming from Iran to, go around the laws for, actually their nuclear program, and other countries as well. There's a significant problem there. So while we're looking at this, we need to take a heavy-handed approach towards a lot of the fraud that's available and using the tools that are available today, but also create these type of sandboxes and get involved intimately, whether it's on the municipal level, the state level, the federal level, really to understand the implication of this. Because while they, rabble-rouse with their bills, a lot of it is just to promote other aspects of some of their, legislative agendas. And, I really would love to see more action. I think that I'm a big fan of what the SEC has done at this point. But then you also have what you have in every government, right, is you have different agencies that are all aiming to take over more authority. And that's where there's a major concern.
If blockchain technology, especially if it's scalable, efficient, cheap, and secure, can provide for a really good infrastructure for tokenization of assets, whether financial or real-life assets. How do you see a potential of this for the EU and in general for the world, tokenization of assets?
There is certainly a potential in every innovative technology. But I think one has also to start from seeing reality. And what I just heard is also that our society is changing, and we have not probably fully understood and mastered the consequences of societal change that is coming through the increased use of social media, of influencers, you call it celebrities or all others, which probably go hand in hand with what the non-European or American societies like China, Russia, or part of the emerging world see as a decay of values in our society. So therefore, I think another element that we have to take into account in Europe is that our population is much less financially literate than in the US. You complained before that in the blockchain area, people are insufficiently literate.
Yes.
But we are not even literate in traditional finance, much less so. And that is also maybe a reason why our regulators come in much earlier and much stronger, because there's a higher amount of the need for protection in that respect. But when it comes to protection, I am a little bit surprised. When I look back at my career, back in the 70s when I started, there was one word that was overall, and that was self-regulation. And I'm very surprised that this is something that is not widespread in the crypto world, because it helps official regulation. It does not replace them. Even official regulation and supervision does not prevent crisis. In the UK, one banking crisis, you take away supervision from the central bank. The second banking crisis, you give it back to the central bank. Third crisis, you take it out again, and so on and so forth. So no crisis will be prevented. But if there is not an element of also self-regulation inside the industry, I think there will always be a tendency of over-regulation, and then there will not be a cooperative stance. And that is what I miss a little bit, and self-regulation comes, for example, also with the setting of industry standards for reporting, industry standards of minimum governance rules and disclosure and so on. And this is where I see that the industry itself has still quite a way to go. There are first initiatives now in this direction, especially coming from the US. But I think we are far from where we have been in traditional markets back in the 70s. That does not mean that self-regulation replaces official regulation, but it's a necessary complementary aspect of an organized and stable financial world.
I was going to say, while I agree, I'd love to see more self-regulation. I don't know if it would apply to the majority of crypto where they're actually, their aim is not to have an honest system. Their aim is to obfuscate all of what they're doing. And to give you an example, I mean, SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, had said something about, finding 250 or 250 million, 250,000 on a desk, not knowing. Well, what are we talking about? We're talking about digital ledger technology, right? So how are we not utilizing the technology for the transparency and the auditability that it offers, but yet we're going to just trade tokens and manipulate the price and fleece everybody out of their lifelong earnings? Or you have, prominent CEOs telling people to mortgage their house and buy an asset that is just absurd, right? And so they're not coming at it in an honest way. And if we really think about where we're at, the reality is a lot of these cryptocurrencies are not scalable, so they offer no impact. I just recently met with New York City, the Office of Technology Innovation, and for 3 years they spent $18 million on all sorts of crypto projects that never got off the ground because guess what? They didn't scale and they didn't offer any impact, right? It should be a value proposition. But, and they ended up kind of closing that shop down. But whereas if we're really looking at this as replacing infrastructure rather than just some get-rich-quick scheme, now you can have those people that are going to be able to self-regulate like entrepreneurs like myself that want to see the utility and the benefits that this technology brings forth, not just for my back pocket, but for humanity. I want to be able to prevent 35 million records from, an Uber hack going onto the dark web. Why? Because that's going to affect my children, it's going to affect your children, and your families. And, I think that's where we really have to direct and aim towards this, is understanding that, yes, you're able to make payments. Hopefully you're able to make micropayments. But this technology has to scale enough to actually make an impact beyond a borough, right? Beyond a state, beyond a country. It has to be global. And that's where, again, when you're comparing what a cryptocurrency value proposition is, or to a scalable, say, proof of work implementation like BSV, it's a night and day difference. It's an infrastructure, it's plumbing versus just a way to take money out of somebody's pocket.
Yeah, I have to say on the self-regulation issue, because Sam brought
I wanted to ask you after the interview.
While I was interviewing him, obviously before he was arrested, he brought up self-regulation. And I said what I'll say here, which is I'm the father of 3 small children. I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 2-year-old. I'm somewhat skeptical of self-regulation. Let's just put it that way. Metaphorically speaking, I understand. I'm not trying I understand there's a give and take. I think, to Brian's point, why were these companies set up through shell corporations in the Caribbean? Right? Was it they were stifled? Was the innovation was stifled domestically, or was it that they were trying to get away with stuff? A lot of companies moved to the Bahamas under the DARE Act, which was a piece of legislation that was guided along by certain forces in that country, and I don't know that the legislation either had the substance, leaving the substance aside, didn't have the enforcement. There was no real teeth to it. It wasn't, and everyone knew that, and so it was a free-for-all. So I'm just skeptical of it in that way. Now, maybe once it's been cleaned up, once a lot of 99% of the stuff has gone away, then perhaps we can have a more adult conversation, let's say. But at this point, it's hard not for me to analogize, the self-regulation of crypto as the self-regulation of my 9 and 7-year-old, or perhaps my 2-year-old might be better.
Moving away a little bit from the cryptocurrencies and self-regulation, have you came across any blockchain-based use case that you find particularly interesting?
I mean, I've been trying, and I think no one can tell the future. I am completely agnostic as to blockchain, in the sense that if blockchain can prove itself, then wonderful. I think Brian was perhaps mentioning this earlier. I've heard about or maybe it was Yves actually, back-end systems, low throughput. I've seen sort of evidence that blockchain might be useful for that. Scalability has been an issue. I mean, that's I understand that folks here think BSV could do that. That's certainly open to that. But for other blockchains, other attempts at scalability, I think they've failed thus far.
Yep. Look, spend some time with us, look around. There are many interesting projects using this technology to bring real-life utility. I think we'll open the stage for some questions. Lucy?
It is question time, and thank you for a brilliant conversation, guys. Really insightful, thought-provoking stuff. We have some questions from the audience, so you ready?
Yes.
Okay, our first question. While focus is on cryptocurrency, what is the panel's thoughts about the exchanges like Kraken, Binance, and Coinbase and their responsibility to the public? And anyone can.
So with exchanges, I do believe, there are specific states like New York State that are looking at the exchanges and their practices and the conflict of interest that exists. And, obviously any government doesn't want to see business leave their borders. They'd like to bring more business and innovators into that. But they also understand that there are some serious concerns there. And again, something like the New York State Attorney Crypto Act, where they're really emboldening the bit license, which was pretty much the gold standard. But now you can actually apply that to this conflict of interest and just the regulatory oversight that's required. And again, you've got exchanges that are, curtailing the law right now, to embolden some horrific things, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's, arms, and I do believe that policymakers are now just kind of taking that in and requiring the education before they can act.
Yeah. Okay, next question. So what's the panel's thoughts on the XRP case? So XRP is a point regarding former SEC Hinman's conflict of interest, but overall XRP is a security under... In fact, that question doesn't make sense to me. What's the panel's thoughts about the XRP case? I'm just going to stick at that.
I'm not intimately familiar.
Yeah, so I would, and this is maybe my personal opinion, I would find it very difficult to classify XRP as anything but a security. As far as the case goes, there's potentially a decision here within, fairly soon, I think within the next month or so, that there may be a decision on that, and I would hope that, that we do maintain that this is a security, and that there's, some fines leveled, and that there's some requirements that allow them to actually come into compliance. Being a security is not a negative thing, it just ensures that there's consumer protection. And that's, and that there's not fraud, right? And that's why utilizing something, like the Howey test to look at these various coins and offerings that are out there and applying that is key right now.
Another question is, isn't stablecoins akin to counterfeiting? Their issuance is extremely opaque and most people have no idea of their issuance criteria. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I've heard that argument, and I think there's a lot of... It's compelling to a certain degree, because if you're creating what's effectively a synthetic version of an actual currency, right? Whether it's dollar denominated or denominated in some other currency, but you actually are not clear at all as to its backing because none of these companies have been audited. What guarantee does the customer have that their money is actually backed? I mean, and when it comes to Tether, for example, they very clearly state on their website that you cannot even attempt to redeem Tether unless you have, I think it's $100,000 or something or more. So, to me, I would be interested in your perspective on this, but the ability to create something that looks an awful lot like a dollar or a euro or whatever, but is not backed and yet is sort of almost drafting off of the trust that's in our systems, I think that's a very dangerous thing. It can be exploited for all sorts of reasons.
Yes, as I said in my speech, stablecoins, they report voluntarily on their reserve assets. It is not standardized. It is not audited, as you said. And it is impossible to verify whether these reserves exist and whether they are reported at the right value. And as long as we do not have more certainty about that, this is a great risk, because they could destabilize monetary policy. They could influence the market price formation of certain money market assets in which they pretend to invest. They could have an effect also on the debt financing of some sovereigns. This is money creation outside the monetary policy area, and we will simply not authorize that. And that is why the new regulation now foresees that there must be a one-to-one reserve creation that must be verified, validated, supervised, and
audited.
And audited. And also, we would like to know what are the instruments in which they intend to invest and how they affect the whole chain of command. And that is for the moment not the case. So they need to be authorized, get a license, and before they start operating, have capital requirements. And we would like to know where the capital requirements are invested, what is the liquidity risk, what is the leverage risk that is associated with it, what is the concentration risk. All this, for the moment, is work in progress. And that is not what I mean by self-regulation. This is, for me, regulation from the public side. That is level one, the big principles. Where I see self-regulation coming in is the technical regulatory standards. What are the standards? So not that we start asking standards that cannot be fulfilled, or which are more difficult to fulfill as if we would take other ways or other standards. So this is where we need a cooperation and an exchange of views with the industry in order to have also a regulation that is efficient and the least imposing.
Okay, my final question. Right? Got one more question, time for one more question. Yes, okay. We'll take one from the floor.
I'll try and do it in 31 seconds.
You got a bit more time than that, don't worry.
Just, I want to remind the panel that you brought up. Contracts, investment contracts, disclosure. The SEC is an exemplar of this system where you simply file your contract into the SEC. Now, that means that this process is about contracts. We have more than 1,000 years of experience in analyzing contracts. We might have 100 years in public regulation of these areas, but we have much more experience in analyzing contracts. So why aren't we leaning on the profession of law by taking an intermediate step and simply saying, show us the contract? Why aren't we saying, put that contract out there on the blockchain or somewhere appropriate, so we can let the public look at it, we can let the lawyers look at it, and we can start to then answer all the questions that you've brought up as an intermediate step. Why not show us the contract?
I say go for it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with that. But again, I think you have to look at what we're talking about here. The majority of all of these things are not an honest attempt to provide even a financial instrument, right? So we can go that route, but I don't think that they would be interested in participating.
Exactly. You ask the question, show us the contract, and if they don't show you the contract, they've shown their colors. Yeah. They're a scam.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of money that's been put into these various policymakers, coffers that allow them to make these delays or, to not make a decision, right? So
they're trying not to show you a contract.
Yes.
Yeah. Make them show that contract.
I'm in favor.
But even if you show the contract, I think, why is that insufficient? Contract is freedom. It presupposes, it predicates that you have two equal parties. That is not the case. Sometimes the consumer and the investor, I said, either because of illiteracy, financial illiteracy, does not understand the contract. And it has not at its disposal the army of lawyers to analyze the contracts. And that is where then the protection of public regulation needs to come in, and also supervision. So contracts is the base, but then it needs to be complemented also by regulatory supervision and control.
That's why I call it an intermediate step.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a brilliant last question. Thank you very much. Just give it up.
You have one more?
No, I'm afraid I'm being told in my ear we've got to cut it. Maybe you guys can have a chat off stage if that's all right. So give it up for Marcin, Yves, Bryan and Ben. Thank you, gang.